monologue. He says his mother told him that no matter how hard life was, he should dream big. If he kept moving forward, chasing his dream, eventually he would become the protagonist of his own life, and he believed her. Unfortunately, he now feels foolish for believing in those stories, because at that moment he was choking on his own blood and spitting it out. His legs no longer obeyed his commands, and he was lying on the ground. Leaning against a random piece of rubble, he wondered if that was the place where he would perish. He had a wound caused by a demonic spear, and it couldn't be healed by potions or magic. Maybe an elixir could fix it, but he didn't have one. Maybe he did, the MC thinks as a group of people approaches. This group had 4 people. 1 man and 3 women. The man, named Choi Do-yoon, looked at him in that miserable state. Stopping in front of the MC, he said that he could have defeated the monster alone. He didn't even need to interfere, but he chose to anyway. The MC gave a weak chuckle, and the man asked what was so funny. He simply replied that the man said exactly what he thought he would. In his thoughts, he says he worked himself to exhaustion there. He even teamed up with that psychopath just to survive. Still, it was insane to think he would lose his life trying to save him. Ordinary people, in the middle of that disaster, hugged each other and cried. The boy asked if Do-yoon had an elixir, and he replied that he did. The MC then asked if he intended to use it to save his life. Do-yoon responded that the price of an elixir was astronomical, so if he was saving that one for himself, he wouldn't waste it like that. To complete the humiliation, he added that the protagonist wasn't worth enough for him to use the elixir on. The boy gave a weak laugh. Almost losing consciousness, he said that the world was completely screwed up. The divine spirits, the greatest beings in the heavens, they enjoyed watching humans struggle for their own entertainment, handing out challenges and rewards. They saw that bastard Do-yoon as great entertainment and didn't care about someone like him. No one ever cared about him. The MC cursed that world, Do-yoon, and the divine spirits to hell as his final words. One of the women scolded him, but Do-yoon interrupted her. Raising his hand, he asked the protagonist why he had done it. He only needed to provide intel and watch the fights. Why did he choose to fight? The boy replied that he was tired of staying in the shadows and tired of life. He had reached his limit, and so he started laughing again. Do-yoon asked if he did it just to save some civilians. He was probably going to say more, but something interrupted him. A being appeared above them, and everyone looked up. It was a teller, a race that intermediated between humans and divine spirits, and they were the ones who sold humanity out to the other beings. Excited, the messenger said they had done well in the survival task. The MC just thought they didn't care about their suffering. The messenger then said the next challenge awaited. The end was near, and they should do their best. The MC told Do-yoon to go. He just wanted him and his group to leave. The redhead complained about being called a minion by him, but the other girl told her to let it go. Do-yoon's face looked angry, which made the MC curious. He asked the man if he would use the elixir on him because he was sad about his death, but that didn't seem to be the case. The man turned around, and together with his group, turned their backs on the protagonist, leaving him where he was. His true last words were goodbye. Once again, he felt excruciating pain and vomited blood again. All he could think was that in the end, he failed to be the MC of his own story. He failed both in that world and in his story. He was never the protagonist of either. He truly thought it was the end, but then a blue light approached him, and he opened his eyes to see what it was. The boy then wondered what he had been living for. He at least hoped paradise was real at the end of this life. Regretfully, the MC said that if he had a second chance, if he could fix his mistakes, he would rise higher than anyone in that world. So high that he wouldn't need to envy anyone and could be proud of himself. He just wanted to live a life like that. Raising his hands to the sky, he sheds tears as his vision fades away forever. The scene changes, and now we see an absurd number of tiny little creatures with their little holes showing. A bunch of small ghosts. The MC opens his eyes and wonders where the hell he was. Was he still alive? That was impossible. He had been pierced by the cursed demonic blade. There was no way he could have survived that attack. Suddenly, he seems to see his own reflection and is shocked. He was now one of those little creatures we saw at the beginning of the scene. Frightened, he screams, asking what the hell all those things were. A voice says it seems they're all here now, and that catches the protagonist's attention. The MC sees a humanoid creature with the head of a deer. It was a teller, but this one seemed different from the ones who used to appear to humans. Turning to the little creatures, he says he's going to briefly explain the situation they're all in. Now they were going to be their messengers. Everyone was there to prove their worth. This nonsense confuses the protagonist. There was a company called Celestial Corp ANC. Even without fully understanding the situation, the messenger says the explanation ends there, and suddenly a portal opens beneath all of them. As the creatures fall into the vortex, the teller tells them to show what they got. The creatures scream while falling into the endless void of space. The protagonist wonders what was happening. Was he going to die again? A system screen appears in front of him, with the message activating Genesis Blessing. Several bubbles form around the creatures, protecting them and stopping their fall into the void. The protagonist starts to panic, because he can't breathe inside the bubble. But then again, he doesn't even have a nose. How was he breathing before? The system screen displays his first mission. He was now a teller, and he needed to gift the divine spirits with good stories. He had 1 hour. If he failed the mission, he would lose his life for good. That makes the protagonist furious. How could they be put in such a situation? Before he could complain more, he sees something that grabs his attention. From a distance, he could see Earth, but that planet had been destroyed years ago. How was that even possible? The MC realizes he truly is in the afterlife, but he's been reincarnated as a storyteller, and he notices that he's in the past. Still unsure of what was going on, he decides to focus on his mission, especially since the countdown was already at 57 minutes. If he was in the past, back when Earth still existed, then this must be the era when the collectors were still active. Even before it was destroyed, life there wasn't normal. Several gates had opened, and monsters started coming out. The collectors hunted them. The protagonist thinks that he should choose one of those collectors who didn't have a contract yet. But something about the mission felt off. Every collector needs a contract with a teller in order to grow stronger and gain sponsorship from the divine spirits. This didn't seem like such a hard mission to complete. He presses the Accept Mission button. The system screen gives him his destination. He had to go to Seoul, South Korea. Why am I not surprised? They always go there. The protagonist was struggling to press the mission button on the system screen because of how short his arms were. Shaking with the effort to press the button, he also complains about not having fingers. Something strange happens, and the protagonist's attention shifts. Meanwhile, watching through system screens, the teller becomes curious. He notices that most of those little creatures didn't really understand the situation they were in, and he already thought this batch wouldn't be very promising. Then something catches his attention. Suddenly, the little creature that was our protagonist transforms into a human. Even he is shocked by the transformation and wonders if it happened because he really wanted it, due to the lack of fingers. Before he could get lost in thoughts about it, he decides to focus on the mission. It was far more important. After pressing the button, he vanishes. The other little creatures also notice the MC's transformation and wonder how he managed to do it. The teller who hired them was stunned to see that the MC had turned into a human. It happened way too fast. This wasn't normal. In just 3 minutes, he had achieved a transformation that usually took 2 to 4 weeks. Things were now looking a lot more interesting from that teller's perspective. This mission wasn't going to be as boring as he'd have thought. We are now in the capital of South Korea. The protagonist was on a street, observing, still unaware of where exactly he was, but something caught his attention the very next moment. He was standing in front of the Collectors Association, and that was impressive because they had ceased to exist after the apocalypse began. In the end, the MC decided to stop thinking about it because he needed to focus on finding a collector first, so he opened the system window. There were some red dots on the map, probably already contracted collectors, and the blue dots were the ones without a contract. If his assumptions were correct, he needed to sign a contract with a collector who had at least some talent, or he would have serious problems. He was still thinking about how difficult that would be when a police officer approached him and called for his attention. Looking back, he saw the officer asking who he was and if he was a collector, but the MC simply replied that he was looking for someone. The officer got furious at his attitude, so he grabbed the MC by the shoulder to get him out of there. Immediately, the system reacted and the officer received a powerful electric shock, making him pull his hand away from the protagonist at once. Shocked, the officer asked if he was a teller, to which the MC answered yes. He apologized, saying he thought he was human. As the officer ran off, the MC realized that he truly was in the past because tellers were treated with great respect during that time. That wasn't important to him, so he left and began searching for a collector with whom he could sign a contract. Looking at people through the system window, he could see their names and ages, but that didn't seem to help him at all. Closing the system window, he thought he didn't have time to be interviewing every collector he ran into. Looking ahead, he noticed something that caught his attention. A woman in the crowd with her hand inside her boyfriend's pants. No, wait. Actually, it turned out to be something else. There were some books there, but it seemed only the MC could see them. That wasn't a system window. It seemed to be something else, and he wondered if it was a skill unique to him. Time was running out. He had about 37 minutes left until the mission ended. It wasn't a lot, but he believed he still had time. He tried to grab the book with his hands, and the book started trembling before him. Apparently, his assumption was correct, and grabbing it worked. Curious, the MC picked up one of the books within reach to see what was written in it, but what he saw left him completely shocked. The ability he had was extremely powerful, and that excited him. Could this ability really be exclusive to him? There were 3 minutes left before the mission time limit ended. The other tellers had already found people to sign contracts with. Only the MC was left. The teller seemed disappointed in the protagonist. There was 1 minute left, and he already believed the MC was going to die. No matter how talented he was, there was no way to complete the mission in 1 minute. Switching to Yu-Hien's perspective, we see him looking at a girl eating instant noodles who was surprised to see him. Frightened, the girl fell back and asked what he was. She said she would call the police if he didn't leave her house immediately. The MC said nothing, which made the girl even more scared, asking if he could even hear her. A book appeared in front of her, and we see she looked a lot like the Dokebi from Rainbow Six Siege. She was left speechless by the sight. Smiling weirdly, the MC simply said that he had found her. Could it be that he knew her from the past? The world the MC was in was a mixed world, where reality and the abstract coexisted. The physical and spiritual realms were intertwined. Thinking about this, he realized that the contents of the book were so powerful they could be considered a cheat, but he was excited by it. Reading the contents of the book, he saw Kim Sang-duk, awakened 5 years ago with the water cannon skill. They showed others' lives and pasts. Looking up, he wondered if there wasn't a book for him as well, but that didn't seem to be the case, and that made him a bit sad. Even so, he grabbed someone else's book and wondered why each one had different colors. He began reading the new book. The contents of this book led him to form a theory in his mind. If it was correct, then there weren't just bronze and silver books. It was quite possible he could find a gold-colored book, and the better the color, the more valuable the life the person had lived. The aura of the books showed him the person's innate abilities and their growth potential. So the aura was even more important than the color. And to think he could see people's potential long before they signed contracts, that was incredible. It would put him ahead of everyone. Realizing he still had time to find someone, he understood there was only one thing to do: look for the highest potential possible out there. Teleporting, he said he was sure he'd be able to find the best possible option with this ability he had. 10 minutes until the end of the mission. The protagonist was on the ground, frustrated for not having found anyone truly promising to contract. He started to get worried because his time was running out, but he was still determined. It was hard, but he didn't want to settle for lesser potential, knowing he might find the best one of all. So he began searching again. A woman walked past him, and the man asked her what year it was. She replied that it was the year 20XX. He thanked her and began to think. There were still 5 years before everything started to fall apart. He wondered who might awaken during this period with great potential. He remembered 3 who were known as the 3 Miraculous: the Saint Bang Sang, the Fire Knight Inbium, and the Sword Empress, Kang Hiram. Yu-Hien opened the system to recall the 3. Bang Sang was an anonymous figure, impossible to locate, and Inbium lived in the US, which made things harder for him. The only option left was the Sword Empress, Kang Hiram. Was she the girl we saw eating instant noodles? My goodness, she was the strongest of the 3, and he remembered an interview where she said she stayed hidden until her early days, so the MC went to find her. Arriving at the place where she was hiding, he was a bit confused, trying to understand where the system had sent him. It was a simple dormitory, and he found it hard to believe someone like the Sword Empress could live in such a filthy place. She hadn't noticed his presence yet and was calmly eating her noodles until he called her by name. Immediately, the girl looked back, startled, and we saw that the time left before the protagonist's mission ended was 4 minutes. We returned to the scene where she fell back, scared, trying to understand who he was and how he got inside her dorm room. The golden book appeared above the girl, but she wasn't aware of its presence and kept staring at the protagonist, frightened. Smiling, even while sweating, the man finally said that he had found her. Placing himself in a respectful posture, he introduced himself as a teller from Celestial Body Inc. and asked if she was Kang Hiram. She said yes. Yu-Hien said he was there to sign a contract with her, and she, moved, asked if he was being serious. At that moment, the MC wondered if he had really found the right person. The girl was thrilled to see someone interested in making a contract with her. The MC was uneasy, but it was too late to back out now. He had no more time to look for anyone else, so he said that was exactly why he was there. She got nervous and said her abilities were bad. Yu-Hien asked who told her that, and she replied that everyone around her had said so she had given up on becoming a collector. That's when the MC understood why she lived in that place. She still had no idea of the level of her talent, and he explained that to her. Excited, the girl asked again if he was serious, and he confirmed it, approaching her in a slightly seductive way. He explained that he would help her awaken her true potential. She just needed to sign the contract he had brought out in his hands. He had only 15 seconds left, but she still hadn't signed the contract, which started to make the boy very nervous. The next moment, she asked where her pen was, and immediately the protagonist handed one to her. As she was signing her name on the contract, the MC urged her to be quick, otherwise we already know where he'd be going. She finally finished signing the contract, but it was already too late. Time had run out, and the story ends here. Just kidding. With only 2 seconds left before his life timer expired, the system window showed that he had successfully completed the mission. Satisfied, the MC thought about the promise he made before becoming a teller, that he would live a life with no regrets. Yuyan told the girl he was excited to work with her, and she lit up with joy, asking him to take good care of her. He was still impressed by what he had seen about her. In his previous life, she was so noble that people theorized she came from a wealthy family, but that wasn't the case. The MC pulled out the golden book containing the girl's past and opened it to see what might be in there to use, but something left him completely shocked. She had not one, but 3 main character specializations, and only one of them had been awakened. Her level was already absurd. These specializations were so impressive that one of them was even the same as the one in Chuck Junkyun's story. 3 of the highest ranked talents, and only one had awakened. If she managed to awaken all 3 at once, just how powerful would she be? Yuyan asked her if she was aware of her talents. Hiram still believed her talents were weak, and the protagonist could hardly believe she thought that. She said that during her training, she had been instructed not to talk about her talents, but the MC reminded her that they had a contract now. Laughing, she said the name of the talent was Goryeo-era Sword Master, and claimed the name sounded like a joke. Yuyan was stunned by her attitude. He asked her to confirm whether she had ever told anyone about her abilities, and she said no. Besides, people didn't usually ask. The MC could only think that ignorance really was something frightening. She began to suspect he wanted to cancel the contract and said she wouldn't allow that, but he reassured her that he wasn't disappointed. Opening the system window, he received a notification that he had been officially hired by the teller's company and had a mission to attend the opening ceremony. He informed the girl that he'd have to leave for a bit, and she asked for how long. He said he didn't know, but it didn't seem like it would be quick. Yuyan asked what kind of equipment the girl used, and she said she used a shield. He asked why she had chosen that as her weapon. She explained that even though she didn't have combat talents, she was physically strong, so she figured she could serve on the front lines as a shield. During her training, she had used a spear because her instructors recommended it. This frustrated the MC. She'd avoided using a sword until now. Placing the shield in her hands, he asked her to listen to what he was going to say. He told her to trade the shield for a sword and train a lot. She asked if that was all she had to do, and he said yes, because only then would she truly grasp the extent of her talent's power. Pressing the button to accept the opening ceremony, he told her to make sure she did what he had told her to do. Hiram still tried to ask him to wait, but it was already too late. He had teleported and left her alone at that moment. After trading the shield for a sword, the girl was in a construction area, preparing to begin her sword training. Still uncertain, she wondered if she could really learn the art of the sword just by swinging it around. She had never done this before. She commented that she had never swung a sword in her life, then started making several random movements to see what would happen. Suddenly, something made her realize that her movements were getting better and more precise, and she began to feel something new. It was increasingly noticeable that her movements were becoming more graceful, and she couldn't quite understand what was happening. Yudian returned from his mission saying he didn't expect it to take so long. He had teleported to where Hiram was, wanting to see her progress, and when he looked in her direction, he saw she was doing very well. Her stance was solid, and she could already perform several movements, even though no one had taught her anything so far. No wonder she would be known as the Sword Empress in the near future. Just thinking about that made him excited for what was to come. Hiram was startled by the MC's presence and screamed, asking how long he had been standing there. He even thought he might be disturbing her because of that. Looking at his system screen, he said he just didn't want to interrupt her training, and she replied that she wasn't even training seriously yet. His next mission was his life's mission, to collect various stories and build a library with them so that he could eventually earn a promotion. Hiram asked what he was doing since she couldn't see her system window, which made sense, and he said he wanted to make a library. Surprised, the girl asked if that wasn't the first thing a teller did, and he explained that he had just started this job, but she didn't believe him. He said he had nothing to gain by lying to her, and then a text box appeared in front of him so he could choose the name of his library. Looking through a list of suggestions, he saw that they were all terrible, and he got annoyed with the trolls who made that list. Yuyan asked if he really had to pick one of those names just to attract the spirit's attention. One name caught his eye, and he opened it to see. Looking at the library, he saw a collector being crushed by several small monsters, while receiving countless comments telling him to give up. That story wasn't pleasing any of the divine spirits, and Yuyan understood the problem of making a contract with a bad collector. He decided to leave the library's name for later, but began creating his own right away. He asked Hiram if she was ready to swing her sword a bit, and she looked confused. The two of them teleported to another location where there was a portal. The girl asked what place that was, and he explained it was the entrance to the world of thoughts, a place of myths, legends, and stories. Contemplating the portal, the MC explained the teller's role, to tell stories to the higher spirits, and this was how they did it. Turning to Hiram, he He said he had a question to ask. Did she know what the implications were of the stories they were about to show? She asked if it was the story of a main character, and he said it was something like that, but each story could belong to a different genre. Still, among so many stories, there was one genre that truly stood out above the rest, the heroic tales. Standing before the portal, Yu said that from now on, she would be the protagonist of heroic tales. She still doubted that, but he said he would help her. The scene shifted, and they were now on a kobold mountain. The MC asked if she knew anything about them, and she said she knew a little. Opening the system window, the protagonist then opened his library. Immediately, some higher spirits began entering it. Already interested in seeing what kinds of stories would be told there, he began speaking to them, introducing himself. Soon he realized they were the same ones who had been leaving negative comments in the other library. They started making negative remarks before the story had even begun, which made the MC realize they were there just to watch him fail. Taking a step back, the MC explained that he would go to the observation room to tell her story, so she'd have to fight alone. This scared the girl. Trying to calm her down, he said she'd do fine. She just had to swing the sword the same way she had before. The next instant, 2 monstrous feet appeared. Hiram was terrified and started screaming, but the MC told her she could do this. She just needed to believe in herself. Nervously, she said that even if he said that, she was still scared. Then the monster prepared to strike as she whimpered in fear. The kobold wasted no time and delivered its first blow, while Hiram managed to dodge clumsily by throwing herself to the ground. The kobold launched more attacks, and the girl started screaming for help because she was so frightened. She stumbled and fell backward, which ended up saving her from a horizontal strike that would have likely cut her in half. Negative comments from the spirits began to appear, saying they expected her to head straight to her coffin, leaving her completely frozen. Voices began to echo in her mind, and we saw a flashback where people mocked her skills and her raw strength. Laughter and scornful remarks came her way, saying she didn't even have the ability to make a contract with a teller. She began to cry in those memories, holding her shield as if it were some sort of protection against those bullies. At that moment, she was sitting in her room, staring at the shield on her bed, too depressed to even want to leave the house. Hiram started to wonder if she had what it took to keep going on this journey, or if she would run away. Back to the present, she was still frozen on the ground, paralyzed by her memories. The sword slashed her arm, just a graze, drawing a bit of blood, but her motivation had changed. She didn't want to run anymore. If she ran again, she'd be a useless human being. Even in that state of poverty, she had to do something, because he had found her. That teller who appeared, saying he wanted to make a contract with her. If she ran away, she wouldn't be able to face Mr. Yuyan. Gripping her sword tightly, she realized that no matter what happened to her, she would never again be as cowardly as she had just been. Watching that scene nervously, the MC shouted her name. He yelled at her to dodge the kobold's strike, as she seemed to be standing still, looking down, just waiting to be sliced to pieces. But the next moment, looking up, we see her eyes shine, and we all know when the eye glows, things are about to get serious. Raising her sword above her head, she managed to parry the kobold's attack with incredible strength. The sword didn't even tilt from horizontal. Looking up, blood in her eyes, hatred fueling her strength, she struck with an incredible blow, defeating it instantly. The divine spirits were completely stunned by everything that had just happened. Not even the MC could believe what he had witnessed. On her knees after finishing the battle, Hiram was only thinking that she would never run away again. She would never be afraid again. Yuyan was satisfied. This was the real Kang Hiram. That was the proper way to wield the sword. A yellow light emerged from the kobold's body. It slowly made its way to the girl's chest plate, and a system message informed her that she had earned 7 points. Shocked, she finally realized what she had just done. While timidly celebrating, the protagonist appeared on her system window and congratulated her on her achievement. The problem was that her fight wasn't over. New enemies were appearing to avenge their fallen comrade. As the battle continued, he explained to her that this world was full of things that could bring her joy, so she shouldn't stop here. It would be much better if she became more ambitious and desired more. Meanwhile, various donations began pouring in for her. Could she really be like that? Hiram responded yes. She was now much more confident in her ability, and even I'm excited to see what happens to her now. The kobolds charged in as a group, but the girl wasn't intimidated. She drew her sword again, ready to take them down. Impressed, the MC checked the viewer data on his library featuring Hiram's stories. It already had more than 15 views in under an hour. Actually, I was mistaken. The one viewing this was another teller, who was impressed by Yuyan's results. His name was Toden. He was impressed and at the same time in disbelief. That shouldn't be possible, even if Yuyan had gotten help from a department. Thinking Yuyan must be using some kind of dirty trick, Toden decided to go analyze this case and see what was really happening. Opening the collector's viewer window, he was simply speechless. Stammering, he began to ask himself who that woman was. She wasn't wearing any protective gear, and her sword was extremely ordinary. After seeing all types of collectors, This was the first time he had ever seen one so unusual. She was getting stronger by the minute. The kobolds, realizing they couldn't handle Hiram, began crying and fleeing, and the MC realized she had gotten much stronger very quickly. Convinced, he began asking the divine spirits what they thought of Hiram, but told them that this still wasn't everything she could do. She could still do far more than just this. The donations didn't stop. She was receiving thousands of points. Hiram called out to him, and he asked what she wanted. She asked what that was. She was standing in front of something red, like a fence, and he informed her that it was no longer the cultivation area. That was something collectors had agreed to create so they could gather points more consistently. She said she understood, but already tightened her grip on the sword. The senior teller watching the scene was impressed to see she had already reached the border on her very first cultivation attempt. Yuyan asked if she was disappointed with something. She replied yes. Now that everything was over, she felt a little frustrated. The protagonist made it clear that it wasn't over. Now that they'd made it this far, they could go all the way. Under his guidance, she would cross the border and clear that entire mind domain, because they could be permanently erased once cleansed. Clearing a domain like that makes another one appear elsewhere. Few have the courage to finish these mind domains due to a lack of skills. That was precisely why they had created the border and avoided cleaning up those domains of the mind. Hiram asked if it was really okay, and he said she could blame him if anything went wrong. Besides, she didn't exactly look like someone who wanted to stop there. Excited, she asked if it was that obvious, and he confirmed it. The divine spirits agreed as well, because they were loving what they were seeing, and she decided that she would clear the entire domain, just as he instructed. While the MC was causing a commotion to rally support for Hiram, the lizard-faced teller was in disbelief over what she was about to do. Hiram readied her strike, but he didn't believe she had the power to destroy the edge. A protagonist should never give up on their goals. Hiram made just one leap. As she charged forward with everything she had, more donations came in for her, because that's what being a true heroine meant. The lizard teller was exasperated. Things were unfolding in a completely different way than usual. She had already reached 20 viewers. In the past, the story had been full of adventures, but the collectors had chosen the easier path, which made the divine spirits lose interest. Because of that, they decided to trigger an apocalypse just to try to get an interesting story. Yuyan knew how that world would end, which is why he was determined to create a future different from the one in his past life. That change wouldn't come from an outsider's intervention, but from humanity itself. These were the Chronicles of the Sword Empress, and they had reached 25 viewers in that story. Appearing before her again, the MC congratulated her for reaching the deepest point of those minds. She was happy to see him, and everyone already knows, if she blushed, it's because she's in love. But all he noticed was that she wasn't afraid anymore. Saying they were almost there, he recommended she take a break, and she agreed, sitting down and admitting she was already getting tired. Yuyan realized that despite her skills, her body still couldn't keep up. She needed to become more resilient. He asked what she thought about fighting with a sword, and she immediately replied that it was the best thing ever, and she should have started with it. No shit. Looking at her book, Yuyan noticed it was glowing more than usual. Whatever she had achieved today must have changed something inside it. He didn't intend to check it now, so he said the kobolds from earlier would be waiting for her in a group at the end of this mental domain. They most likely had a leader, since their movements were so well coordinated. Her face didn't look nervous, and the MC asked what she planned to do. If she wanted, they could stop right there. She gave a light laugh and asked if he was joking, but he wasn't. Standing up, she said she would finish it all, because that was her ninja way. There was no way he'd play dumb after everything that had happened. He said he wouldn't, since he takes responsibility for his words, and asked if they could go now, to which she replied yes. Yuyan was smiling slightly, because he could see that now she was much more confident, and he wouldn't need to hold her back or anything like that. The warning was clear, this would be dangerous, so she needed to have a clear goal in mind. He asked if she knew how to clear domains, and she said yes. This one would be simple. The clearing condition was a raid, and the best way was to defeat everyone, but she'd need to focus on the leader first. There were several ways to clear a mind domain, but in this one she just had to defeat a specific monster, and that made her really excited. The girl was already heading toward the boss and even singing, but the MC asked her to wait. She needed to change weapons first. She asked why, but when she looked at her sword, it was completely damaged. Any impact would shatter it completely. The girl started crying and sobbing, desperate, and the MC said it had held up pretty well for a starter sword. Trying to calm her down, he opened the store window and said she had earned a lot of points along the way, and showed her the best options to choose from. She complained about the price of the swords. It was everything she'd earned so far, but there was no choice. She spent it all on one of them. The sword appeared by her side. It looked like a rapier or maybe a katana. The curved blade left me unsure. Yuyan praised the sword, but she was still crying over the loss of her points, and he said she could earn more now, so it was time to go. The kobolds were waiting for their arrival, the leader observing and waiting with his underlings. Hiram arrived already saying it was their fault she had to change swords since her first one had broken. Sweating in fear, the kobolds noticed Hiram approaching. She was a real threat they had never faced before. Charging at the monsters, the girl shouted that she had to spend all her savings on a new sword because of them. With an extremely powerful strike to the ground, an explosion is created, throwing several monsters aside. Hiram shouts that everyone there is already doomed and starts dismembering many of them while screaming about having wasted her points. The hatred was visible in her eyes, and she turned to attack the boss in a leap. It's amazing what losing money does to people's minds. Crying in despair, the kobold boss begins to scream, but it was already too late. With a single blow, Hiram removes its head from the rest of its body, finishing that domain once and for all. The scene shifts to a cafe where the girl is eating a cake so delicious she couldn't even believe it actually existed. The MC asks if it was really that good while sipping his coffee, and she confirms that yes, she had never eaten anything so good in her life. Yuyan thinks that was an exaggerated reaction, but it's understandable, considering she spent her last few years living off cheap ramen. He says she can eat that every day if she wants, as long as she keeps earning as many points as today. She just has to be careful not to get fat. Changing the subject, she asks what he meant when he said he knew what that Goryeo-era talent of hers truly meant. Yuyan asks if she knows someone named Chuk Jungyang. She makes a face like she doesn't, but the chapter ends there. In the next chapter, we learn that Jungyang was an ordinary soldier, nothing more than a low-ranking public servant. However, one day he climbed the castle walls, which were under control of the Jurchen tribe, and simply wiped the place clean. He not only took out the enemies surrounding him on his own, but mercilessly defeated tens of thousands of them right there. A rumor spread that he had surpassed human limits, which earned him the nickname Sword Master of the Goryeo era. Hiram is impressed by the story, but asks why she's never heard of him before. The MC replies that his friend's name was weird. She grows even more curious and asks what his name was, but the MC refuses to answer. Is it Voldemort or something? She insists he tell her. Yuyan gets flustered and asks her to stop because he's starting to feel uncomfortable and will report her for harassment. If she wants to know about him, she should look it up herself. She opens her phone to search, incredulous that the name could be that bad. But when she sees the name, she actually blushes hard, deeply embarrassed. I saw in the comments that it was the Korean version of King Size D. Furious, she throws the phone at the protagonist's head, calling him a pervert and saying she would be the one filing a harassment complaint. The MC says that even if he was erased from history because of his name, it didn't diminish his worth as a warrior or his strength. Excited, Hiram asks if that meant her ability was considered special. This somewhat childish attitude makes the MC wonder when she'll finally become the true Sword Empress, like she used to be in her past life. Grabbing her by the arm, he says they don't have time for small talk. It was time to put their plans into action. She follows the MC, asking what he meant, and he says they need to work on her image, but she complains that she hadn't finished her cake. Hiram asks the MC if he really thought that was okay, and he says it was perfect in his opinion and asks her to go over his instructions. Don't laugh stupidly, and be careful how you behave in front of the divine spirits. He nods and says it's time to go. The spirits begin to enter the room, and he can already see that there were more people than in the first story. Some spirits were astonished. Their reactions varied in every possible way, and that makes the MC curious. He finally understands why they were like that. They had never seen Kang Hiram properly dressed before, and she looked stunning. The MC thinks, if you ran a poll asking what's the most important trait and character, most would say strength. However, if you ask what the second most important trait is, the answers would vary more, but in his opinion, it was appearance. He knew she could gain a lot more attention by being beautiful, and he was right. Before heading to the next domain, she had something to learn. He hands her something and says it's the story he bought earlier, and asks if it was her first time seeing it, and she says yes. Despite her excellent talents, she still needed to learn how to prepare for each mission, and that would help her. The girl thanked him for it. She began absorbing the stories, and Yuyan asked her how she was feeling. The girl said she felt rejuvenated, to which he replied that was great. Most collectors felt sick after absorbing too many of them. Hiram was about to ask what kind of points he had used to get those stories, when the MC interrupted her and said it was time to go put on their show. Entering the new domain, she asked what kind of place that was. It looked like a maze, but once again she was interrupted by Yuyan. Understanding the situation, she began acting seriously, describing the area as desolate and empty, and the MC explained it was the Labyrinth of Crete. There had been several attempts to clear that place for good, but without success, and that was her mission this time. Hiram asked why no one had managed to do it before, and he replied that they'd never been able to figure out the completion conditions for that place. Walking through the corridors, she began to see several bodies of people who had passed through before but got lost inside the maze. The girl grew exasperated, but the MC asked her to stay quiet. He explained those bodies belonged to people who had entered recently. More than 100 people were already watching her story. Even tellers were observing it. He was gaining a lot of engagement. The MC understood that the tellers were trying to steal ideas from the newbie, but he didn't care. His goal was to make loyal fans for the two of them. Union grabbed a spool of string and handed it to Hiram. She asked why she needed to use that thread there. Mazes are tricky, and that one in particular was worse. In the myth, Theseus used a string to avoid getting lost, so she should do the same. As his final words, he wished her luck before teleporting to the story's viewing area. The system appeared to her, and he explained that she just needed to move forward without looking back, as if it were no more than a basic task. She accepted the challenge and began unraveling the string, while several donations were already coming in, all from someone named XXX. Hiram walked down the corridors among the many bodies, unraveling the string and leaving a trail so she wouldn't get completely lost. Yuyan noticed that even her mental resilience was higher than average. She wasn't panicking even in the face of that complicated situation. Turning a corner, she began observing the area more carefully, but without losing her composure. She finally managed to find what looked like the center of the labyrinth. Could the boss of this place really be the Minotaur from the Greek myth? A light started glowing from that portal, and Yuyan asked her to wait a moment. Unfortunately, it was already too late. A Minotaur at least 5 meters tall was already standing before the girl, snorting and ready to attack. The monster let out a deafening roar. Its hand was already coming down straight at Hiram, ready to crush her, but still, she didn't seem nervous. Watching everything through the system screen, he saw the monster land a massive blow on the ground. The only question was whether Hiram had also been hit. There was too much dust in the area to know if she was hurt, but while the Minotaur stared at the girl, he realized something too late. Her sword had already slashed his chest, and she was now behind him in an attacking stance. Without mercy, the girl began slicing the monster, saying that tonight's dinner would be cow head soup. What a humiliation for the Minotaur. The divine spirits asked what the hell cow head soup was, while the MC got irritated at her for using such cliched catchphrases. Yudian shouted to her that the Minotaur was way stronger than a kobold. Its skin was much thicker and tougher, so taking it down with a single strike would be far more difficult. She should use a hit-and-run strategy. Desperate, the MC kept shouting, but apparently she wasn't listening to his instructions. She didn't seem to have any intention of retreating. She dodged the monster's attacks with mastery, while it continued to bleed heavily. The monster fell to its knees, and Hiram landed on the ground right in front of it. Yuyan stared at the screen, terrified. The girl's sword began glowing with a beautiful shade of green. Kang Hiram had learned to use the Aura Sword, Kai Sword, also known as the Aura Sword, a skill only those at the top can use, allowing them to imbue their weapons with ki to wield them at maximum power. Most collectors don't have the ability to learn this technique on their own. They can only acquire it through stories. That monstrous girl had already fully developed it by herself. The protagonist had truly found a precious gem in her. Hiram prepares her strike, and the two monsters scream at each other while she charges in to slice the Minotaur in half, I think. The sword strikes vertically through the center of the monster's head, the one with horns, not the one in a dress. A massive explosion follows her attack. Her talent was simply unbelievable. Sliced cleanly in two, the monster lay several meters away from the girl, inside a crater formed by her Aura Sword technique. She gazes at her victory, still holding the sword in one hand. As she wipes away her sweat, we see that several donations had come in for her, mostly from that XXX guy. He must be a big fan of hers. Yuyan was shocked. He didn't have to do anything besides watch the massacre. Their subscribers had doubled and were growing fast. Hiram gets the MC's attention, saying something felt off. He asks what happened. She says she defeated the monster, but the domain hadn't been cleared. Even the divine spirits were wondering why it wasn't over yet. Teleporting beside her, the MC explains that the domain really hadn't ended. She's startled by this answer. Speaking to both the spirits and her, he explains why this labyrinth was never completed even after the boss had been defeated. This labyrinth doesn't end just because you defeated the Minotaur. He remembers that even in his past life, many people had beaten it. Still, none of them had ever succeeded in finishing the labyrinth, and that's why no one could figure out its rules. One day, a digger managed to clear the labyrinth, and because of him, the MC knew how to complete it. The condition was to get out of it. Hiram says she could use the thread to go back, but that was the entrance, not the exit. The MC explains this, and she asks where the exit is. Looking upward, the MC says it's up there. Hiram asks if he's talking about the ceiling of the labyrinth, and he replies with another question. Does she know the legend of Daedalus? She says yes. He was a brilliant inventor who created the labyrinthine structure, but someone managed to escape from it, which wasn't supposed to happen. The girl asks if he's talking about Theseus, and the MC says yes, because Daedalus taught him how to use the spool of thread. King Minos, in revenge, imprisoned Daedalus and his son inside that place, and even so, the inventor found a way to escape with Icarus. Showing Hiram a feather, the MC gives her a hint about how she could escape, and she gets really excited after figuring it out. There were many feathers scattered in that place, and she runs off to gather them. She returns with several in her hands, which gets the MC excited too. Tossing them in front of him, she says she thinks that amount should be enough. Immediately, the feathers begin to glow as they fall to the ground. In the next moment, a pair of wings appears on her back. She had received Icarus's wings, which allowed her to fly once a day, an extremely rare item. She was still stunned by all of it, but the MC brings her back to reality, reminding her to use the wings to get out of there. Before leaving the labyrinth, Hiram said she was really lucky. Countless donations come in for her, along with congratulations for doing everything alone. Back at her home, she asks him what he thinks of her now, because her self-esteem was sky high. The MC compliments her, but she wants more. The girl celebrates the victory and keeps asking if she looked beautiful now, but the MC tells her to stop because he didn't seem interested in that. Hiram doesn't give up and says he can't pretend he wasn't affected by her beauty. Not even the divine spirits could resist. That makes him nervous. The MC yells that if she doesn't stop, he's going to hit her, and the girl starts crying, saying he's mean. Dropping the silly conversation, he asks if she's gone to the association yet. She says not yet. Why was he asking? He says it's time to upgrade her class. She needs to move on to higher classes if she wants to earn more money. She quickly gets excited. Flying out the window, she shouts that she'll take care of it immediately, but the MC tells her not to waste her daily flight on something so trivial. He goes along so they won't take advantage of her at the association. Upon arriving, no one seems to recognize her as a collector. Everyone who saw her was impressed by her aura. She no longer seemed like an average collector, but rather someone above everyone else. She walked confidently through the place alongside the MC, and people also thought she was very beautiful. Yuyeon warned her not to even think about using her wings in that place, and with a guilty look, she said she'd never thought of doing such a thing. At the counter, an attendant began talking to them, asking how he could help, and the MC noticed he was being overwhelmed by her aura. The MC replied they were there to claim the rewards for clearing a mental domain, while Hiram was just thinking about what she'd have for dinner tonight. Whispers could be heard all around. People were in disbelief that someone could have completed a mental domain, even after all the rumors. They were angry about the domain shutdowns and wished for the fall of the MC and Hiram because of their supposed selfishness, though they had no idea who they were dealing with. Curious, the attendant asked if there was anyone else with them in that domain, and Yuyeon replied no, she had cleared it all on her own. Many there didn't believe it and even shouted that they were lying, but the attendant asked what her class was. Yuyeon replied she was class 9. Nervous, the attendant asked them to wait a moment while he contacted the person in charge, and they went to the waiting room. The whispers continued. No one believed a single person, especially someone of class 9, could finish a mental domain. He looked at her, concerned, but felt reassured when he saw she didn't seem to care much about it. A giant of man, at least 2 meters tall and over 200 pounds of pure muscle, called the MC and Hiram scammers and liars. Bending down to get a better look at the girl, he began belittling her, as if she could never have cleared a domain alone, and tried to intimidate her. Hiram just watched him, expressionless, not even interested in responding to this guy. That made the musclehead even angrier, thinking a mere class 9 was ignoring him, so he tried to provoke her further to see if she'd react. No reaction came from the girl, who continued watching him without giving any attention. The provocation backfired, and the man began shouting at her for ignoring him, and the MC said she didn't want to talk to him. He turned his attention to the MC and asked who the hell he thought he was, just a manager, but Yuyeon said he preferred to be called her colleague. Even more irritated, the man shifted his target to the MC and told him to leave if he didn't want to get beaten up, but the MC remained impassive. With a sarcastic smile, the MC asked what would happen if he didn't leave. Fully snapping, the big guy launched an attack and tried to punch the MC square in the face, but he warned him to be careful with Hiram. The man didn't listen and charged at the protagonist. At that moment, his gigantic arm was grabbed by one much thinner, yet stronger. Turning his attention to Hiram, the man asked what now. She'd better let go of his arm, or there would be consequences. Little did he know the consequences would be for himself. Everyone looked on in shock as Hiram slammed him to the ground so hard it broke everything. He was unconscious, and the girl just stood there, watching, a scene strikingly similar to the Minotaur one if you paid close attention. Yuyeon said he had warned him and crossed his legs, unconcerned with the whole scene. He had told the guy to be careful, and now we saw that Hiram had finally lost her patience. It's interesting to see how she has two sides in the story. I was wrong, folks. He hadn't passed out, but apparently he didn't have the strength to get up, nor did he understand what had just happened. Looking at her, he was in disbelief that he had been so easily defeated by a woman. What a sexist fool. Hiram, you can finish him off. He tried to get up quickly and charged at her, but she didn't lose her posture and just observed. In the next moment, the onlookers were even more terrified when she threw him down again and finished him off with an arm lock. Everyone there was shocked that a Class 7 collector had been so easily defeated by someone of Class 9. The man hadn't given up. He was still conscious, and if he was awake, he could still take a beating. He was furious after being beaten twice. Watching the MC, he finally realized that was the goal of that damned manager all along. Getting up and releasing pressure across the entire room with his aura, he began screaming and cursing at the MC, and finally, Hiram reacted differently. Yuvian also realizes that those were aerial martial arts and becomes alarmed. He wasn't as weak as they thought. The floor of the association starts to give way even more, which leaves the other regular people in despair, begging them to stop. He ignores them and starts yelling even louder at the protagonist, threatening to cancel his subscription to life. Hiram responds in kind, stepping harder on his back and pinning him completely to the ground, leaving him confused, unsure how it happened. Yuian notices that she had mastered another technique on her own, the heady body technique. She was doing better than he expected when he chose her. Suddenly, she starts blushing for some unknown reason, and even the MC is confused by it. We see that people are impressed with her technique and strength, and how she managed to subdue a Class 7 collector without much effort. Someone starts shouting, asking what they were doing there, and two men in suits approach to try and break up the fight. The MC notices the men took a while to intervene, which meant they had acted under someone's orders not to go in immediately. Another man appears, asking if they really looked that ridiculous to the two of them to be causing such a commotion. He seemed to be the one in charge. Yuyan asks if he's the one in charge of that place, and the man confirms, then asks who he is, and he says he's Hiram's colleague. She was involved in the incident, but they weren't the ones who started the commotion. At most, it was a clash of opinions. The other person unilaterally began to act, and so the girl had no choice but to apprehend him. She acted in self-defense. The man didn't seem fully convinced, but the MC explains that she didn't have a single scratch and acted solely to protect herself and others around. Union adds that he should be grateful for the immediate elimination of the threat, which makes the big boss agree with him. The people there themselves agree that it was the other guy who started the fight, which makes the man smile and apologize for the misunderstanding. Getting to the point that really matters, the MC asks when the person responsible for the domain clearing rewards will arrive. The person the MC was looking for is the old man who explains they're having trouble processing the payment and asks to speak with them privately. Calling for Hiram, they head to the old man's office while people are still praising her strength for defeating the Class 7. Yuyan realizes that her first public appearance was excellent for her image, but what really mattered was just about to begin. The MC's goal was to extract everything he could from the association. Looking through the old man's book, he knows that his potential wasn't as great as Hiram's, but he wasn't someone to be underestimated either. At the time of the fight, he wanted to pressure both of them, but when he saw the situation would turn against him, he decided to change his attitude. Opening the door to his office, he invites them in. The MC is already aware that the old man had a lot of experience and couldn't afford to slip up. The old man introduces himself as Choi Jonmo. He says that, however trivial, he is the one responsible for that place. The MC introduces himself and Hiram. He says he heard the two of them had cleared the 2 mine domains, but the MC corrects him, saying Hiram did it alone, which leaves the old man in disbelief. Yudian says that everyone thought the same. It was unbelievable, but she demonstrated her abilities right there, so that was proof enough. The old man agrees, but he wants to know exactly what the two of them want from the association. Speaking seriously, the MC says that all they want is what is rightfully theirs for clearing the domain. Was the association planning not to reward them for completing the mine domains? The old man's expression changes at that moment. Smiling, he explains that the decision to give out rewards lies solely with him, but the MC knows there's more he wanted from bringing them there. Yudian says he'll be honest. He already had a feeling the association wouldn't want to reward them, but the old man just says he wants to know how. The MC then tells him to stop being evasive and asks if they really have no intention of giving them the proper reward for clearing the domain. That leaves the old man disarmed, as the MC starts pressuring him to be direct and straightforward with his answers. The truth is that the government prefers to leave the domains intact and not have new ones appearing randomly elsewhere, and everyone had agreed to that. Smiling, the old man admitted they were hitting them where it really hurt, because neither the government nor the collectors wanted more work for themselves. To be clear, Choi Jong-mo said they had thrown water on a situation that was implicitly accepted, and asked if they were aware of that. Yuyan explained that domains exist to tell stories to the divine spirits and please them, but humanity was breaking that rule. The old man disagreed. For them, what humanity was doing made sense, since a new domain required money and people to analyze it. It was a risk for everyone, both economically and in terms of lives lost inside the domains, so their stance was a matter of prevention. Yudian said their excuses almost sounded convincing, and the old man shouted that they were doing it to prevent unnecessary death. He asked if the two of them would take responsibility for the lives lost, but the MC said they were collectors. They weren't supposed to take on those responsibilities. Whether people lived or not depended on their skills and their fates. Filled with anger, the old man told him to be careful with his words. The MC repeated that he wouldn't take responsibility, but the old man yelled that lives were at stake. He shouldn't be so irresponsible about it. Yudian remembered his past life and what that decision by the association had led to on Earth. Many more had died because of it. The MC said that having deaths in new domains was truly a tragedy, but maintaining the status quo wouldn't solve the real problem. Collectors were rotten nowadays, acting like cowards for the sake of their own safety, avoiding any real challenges. The old man asked if he thought he was any different. He confirmed that he did. They didn't hide, they didn't stop others, so they were better. And that's why they acted to shut down the domains. Choi Jong-mo asked if he believed they should be rewarded for that. Meanwhile, Hiram hadn't spoken a single word up to that point. The old man said it didn't matter what he said. That's how society and the system worked, and that wasn't going to change. Do you understand that? Smiling, the MC asked if he wasn't afraid of the consequences of choosing that path, but the old man replied they were just two people. Brushing that off, he said that in the old man's view it might seem like that. But what if others decided to act as well? What others? Asked Choi. Immediately, the old man's face turned pale. Before him, several windows from the higher spirits appeared. The divine spirits were extremely dissatisfied with all of it. While he was still startled by seeing the comment screens of the spirits, the MC took the opportunity to introduce himself properly. He was Kang Yu-yeon, a storyteller from Celestial Body. Incorporated. The MC was live, and everyone was watching at that very moment. Choi Jong-mo had thought he was just dealing with some business manager of a collector, yet he carried himself with such humble behavior. His way of taking care of his collector and his skillful handling of the negotiation was different from common tellers who didn't care about humans. The old man was in despair, trying to figure out when exactly he had planned all of this. But in fact, that wasn't the right assumption he should have been making. The man in front of him was acting as if he had anticipated the entire situation from the very beginning. Given the situation, there were no excuses they could make to turn the game in their favor. Sweat dripped onto the table next to the old man. If the image of the association were to be tarnished and bad rumors started spreading, that could be problematic for the entire organization. Desperate, the old man still thought he needed to find a way to escape this situation, and it had to be a masterful one. He tried to come up with a way out. It couldn't be that this was truly checkmate. Looking at the MC, he realized the boy looked quite calm with everything going on. Finally, the old man came to the realization that he was nothing more than a pawn in his hands. He had been defeated long ago. Trembling, he tried to rise from the couch, but his legs wouldn't respond to his command, and he sat back down again. Yudian was smiling cheerfully, and Hiram looked at him, though she still hadn't said a single word. The MC said he was happy to see that the old man still had good instincts. At that point, he had already won completely. Even after all that, the MC thought the old man could have been even more reckless, giving him more room to gain further advantages, but it hadn't happened. If he had refused to back down and fallen into disgrace because of it, the MC could have gotten much more out of him, but he was smart. The old man, who probably gained 30% more white hairs just from the last few minutes of conversation, asked what the two of them wanted. Yudian says he already made his point clear, and the old man finally agrees to reward them for clearing the domain, which makes the MC very happy. Satisfied with how the negotiations turned out, the MC asks what his viewers thought about all this, and they appreciate the negotiation. Some still think they should destroy the old man and the association, but it was a minority who just had a different opinion from the rest. Either way, he had no intention of making any of his fans unhappy with his stories, since he wanted the best outcome for himself. Even so, he receives countless donations. Even if it wasn't a heroic tale, it still brought good rewards. Standing up alongside Hiram, he says he hopes the old man deposits the money into their account by the end of the day, and the old man assures him he will. There was still one more thing, and when he says that, Choi Jong-mo gets startled, asking what it was. Seeing the old man's tension, he reassures him by saying he just wants him to find someone for him. The old man asks who. He wants to know if there's someone named Choi Do-yoon among the collectors, but he says he's never heard that name before. Was he really a collector? The MC says maybe yes, maybe no. He doesn't know the details yet, but he should be about 18 or 19 years old currently, and he gives a detailed description. Either way, he'd appreciate it if the old man could investigate the boy, since he'd like to have some information about him. The old man asks if he knows anything else about the boy, and the MC says he's extremely arrogant, which leaves Choi confused. The day was still bright, and we see that Hiram was finally breathing again. She thought she was going to die from how nervous she felt. The MC praises her for keeping her posture the entire time, and she says she was scared of messing something up, but it was exhausting. Yoon says she needs to get used to this because they'll be doing it often, and she asks if she can't just go back to doing what she usually does. She just wanted to stay away from these meetings and eat cake freely, but the MC says she never can. Explaining, he says that lots of people were talking about her today. She was very charming in there, so she was gaining a lot of fame. Everyone was admiring her, most likely because she was so beautiful and impressive, just like she showed at the association. That makes her blush. He continues by saying that in the future, she'll be able to enjoy all the fame and money that'll come from what happened today. That makes her happy. Excited about all of it, she wants to go out to reward him with something, but he holds her by the shoulder and says there are still things to do. She asks what it is, but before he can respond, something catches his attention. Hiram asks what's wrong, and he says something urgent came up and he'll need to step out for a moment. She's confused, but without explaining much, he opens the system window and uses his Genesis system teleport, saying he'll be right back. She's left alone while the MC is teleported to a very high point in the city. Someone appears behind him and Yoon asks who he is, but the man doesn't respond. Looking back, the MC says he asked who he was, but all the man says is that he's a very rude brat. The man doesn't seem to think much of the MC but says someone wanted to meet him and asks if he's the new recruit. He had come there personally to give him the honor of joining their pentagram division. Without beating around the bush, the MC asks again who the man is, and he introduces himself as Jin Poon, his senior. Yoon asks what he wants with him, and that makes Jin Poon angry, saying he's way too arrogant for a mere rookie. The MC says he has a name, and it's Kang Yoon, which shocks the man. What do you mean he already had a name? It took him 3 weeks to get his, and this kid already has his just after joining the company. Pretending to be superior, he says the MC's name doesn't matter. He was there to invite him to the division, but Yoon immediately refuses. Furious, Jin Poon asks what he just said, and the boy repeats himself. He didn't want to join the association. Hadn't he understood that yet? He tries to use his authority over the MC, but the MC doesn't back down and says it's no use trying to pull rank on him. That leaves Jin Poon confused. Yoon asks if he thought the MC was already part of some division and tells him he doesn't belong to any, at least not yet. The man was still furious at his insolence, but the MC didn't let him finish talking and put him in his place because he was a nobody. To be a senior, he would need to have a good track record, and that wasn't the case with Jin Poon. He wondered how the MC knew that, but the MC didn't say. Yoon added that he was there just to try and intimidate him in the end, but apparently that didn't work, quite the opposite. Wrapping it up, the MC told him to return to his division and make it clear that he would never join the same division as him. Tell that to his teller too. If someone wanted him in that division, they should at least send someone with discernment, or come ask him personally. The man trembled with nervousness at the MC's boldness and stuttered, but the boy simply told him to leave. He teleported away, but not before making a veiled threat against the protagonist. Back where Hiram was, he just remarked that everyone there was a bunch of weirdos. She saw he returned quickly and asked what the issue was that he had to resolve, but he didn't say what happened and changed the subject. Now it was time to finally get her a real manager, and that's how the chapter ends, with this perfect shot of Hiram. The chapter begins with the MC and Hiram standing in front of a building called Basic Management, but it still wasn't the place Yoon was looking for. From what he remembered, it was supposed to be somewhere nearby, so he looked to the side. He finally found the place he wanted. Hiram looked startled. That place didn't seem very well taken care of. Was he really sure that was the right place? The MC said yes. Knocking on the door, he asked if anyone was there and heard someone shouting to wait a second. After a moment, the door opened and a leg in tights appeared. It was a woman who looked at them and asked what they were doing there. The girl caught the MC's attention, but he didn't respond. It was already too late. No matter what he did, he wouldn't be able to fix the broken ties between them. Memories from his past started to return uncontrollably, and running toward a desolate place. His terrified gaze as a voice spoke to him. The voice said he should stay away from someone like her, someone who had lost her humanity, and that woman was being held by the neck. Dried blood flowed from her mouth as the voice concluded by saying it was sure it could make him an excellent offer. Another distant voice appeared, until the woman shouted hello, and the MC finally snapped back to reality. He apologized but thought that her hair was different, yet she was still the same person he had known in his past life. The woman introduced herself as Bak Suryan, manager of Manhwa Management. Cheerfully, she asked if the two of them were there to join her company. Yoon said yes, but only Hiram would be joining her company. Suryan looked at Hiram and thought she was really cool and beautiful, excited to know that a collector like her wanted to be part of her business. The MC told her there was no need to pretend there, and she immediately dropped the act, saying it was a relief. It was like a brick had hit Suryan's head when she realized the collector she thought was so cool wasn't that cool at all, just a silly girl. Looking at the MC, she said she could see Hiram was a collector. But what about him? The MC asked if she wanted to guess. She started thinking and said if he were a collector, he wouldn't have come with her to find a manager, but he didn't seem to belong to a clan either. Guessing, she asked if he was a teller, and that impressed Yu-Yun. Not even the old man had guessed it on the first try. Seeing the MC's expression, she tried to explain, saying that tellers have a different aura from humans, despite the similar appearance. Back Suryan. At that moment, she was just a small CEO of a collector management company. But when the end begins, that will change. During the apocalyptic events of his past life, she used her flawless decision-making to lead many people. She said she was sorry if she was wrong, but he said she was right, and she got excited about having a collector and a teller in her company. The two already began forming bonds, and Suryan asked how the two of them met. While Hiram told the story of their first meeting, the MC watched the girl with what seemed to be a loving gaze. Interrupting the conversation, he asks if they can see the contract, and she gets even more excited about it, and the MC says he wants to discuss the conditions. Hiram congratulates Suryan, but the MC says the contract is between the two of them. After a few moments, it was already signed. Hiram asks the other girl what a manager usually does, and the MC notices that they're already forming a bond of friendship. She explains that the first thing is to provide support for the collectors, so they can focus on their work, organizing their schedules and tasks. The collector says that's quite a lot to do and asks if she has many employees to handle it all, but she says she does everything alone. Frustrated, she says she should also be driving for the collector, but she didn't have enough money to buy a car after setting up the office, though she does have a license. Suryan says she also has a license to operate a backhoe and knows how to weld. Hiram asks why. She explains that it was her plan B in case she gave up on this job, but adds that she'll do her best, and the MC agrees. Standing up, he says Hiram doesn't need her just yet, because she still has to make a name for herself, but she asks if she can help with anything. He was confident that they'd need her soon enough, so he let her enjoy this break for now, since there wouldn't be time later. As they start to leave, the MC says they'll be in touch when the time is right, and she agrees, wishing them good luck. Before finally leaving, the MC hesitates for a moment, but asks her if she has a dream, which leaves her a little confused. In his past life, he asked her what she would do when that tribulation ended, but she says she didn't even have a good life before. But if she were to consider something like that, she answers that all she'd really want is to make a lot of money. The MC says he understands and realizes that this truly was the Suryan he had known during the apocalypse. That answer made the MC understand why she and Hiram got along so quickly. The two of them thought almost the same way. Hiram notices it too and comments that it's like they'd known each other far longer than just today, and she laughs at how strange it is. In his past life, Yu-Yen remembers that the two of them had indeed met before, so it wasn't that strange after all. Meanwhile, in another office filled with papers scattered on the floor, we see someone shouting and calling someone a bastard. It was that supposed senior who was still furious with the MC and says he'll make sure to teach that arrogant brat a lesson. Looking at his system screen, he remembers that Yu-Yen was protected by the Genesis system, but there had to be a way to deal with him. After thinking for a bit, he has an idea and realizes there is indeed a way to get him. A week passes and we see some people at a location having a conversation. It looks like the Collector Association. Hiram and the MC were arriving, and people notice it's them and start whispering that she had already cleared 4 domains. They were getting ready for another domain, and several people seemed to be going together. She asks if it was that dangerous, and it was. This domain in particular was different from the usual. One could only enter once every 3 months, and if you fail, you can't go in again. She asks if there was a reason he chose such a dangerous domain, and the MC asks if she didn't join this business to succeed. She confirms that she did, and he says the two of them share the same goal, even if they walk different paths. He also aimed for a high position. Regardless of what their reasons are, they are valid for them, and that's what matters, because they shouldn't have mediocre reasons holding them back. If she really wants something, she should pursue it even if her bones break and her flesh bleeds. Does she have the confidence to do that? Before Hiram can answer, someone yells that the domain is opening, and the portal begins to shine brightly. The MC says he doesn't want her answer now, but someday she'll need to have it, both for him and for herself. On the other side of the portal, we see the collectors on top of a wall, watching an army on horseback charging forward. The chapter begins with the realization that this domain was a large-scale war, and Hiram wonders if they'll have to fight too. She actually finds it fun, while the MC observes her through the system window. Someone from one of the armies shouts to stop them with everything they have, while the soldiers yelled to charge. This was the Ottoman War. The only question is which one, since that empire fought at least 5 wars against different countries. The defending side shouts that they can't afford to lose, or the enemies will breach their walls. Several soldiers were engaged in battle, and the massacre was inevitable. The MC's mind flashes back once again to his past, making him remember people running in desperation, terrified of being eliminated. In his past, all he could do was watch what was happening, unable to take any action. He closed his eyes, trying to return to the present and not let himself get lost in those thoughts. Focused once again, he thought he wouldn't let that happen again. This was a promise to himself. We go back 1 week in time to the headquarters of Celestial Body Incorporated. The teller who had hired him was explaining how the ceremony would work for all the new tellers. Most of them were still little white orbs, but they were confused because the ceremony would take place in unison with the divine spirits. The MC, in human form, listened carefully to the instructions from the deer-headed teller, who said they wouldn't actually meet the spirits. They were already in a large hall filled with food, while many of the smaller tellers enjoyed the feast. Yuvian stood in a corner, motionless and observing, with only a glass of wine in his hand. He was still curious how he had managed to enter that company. It was one of the 3 largest teller organizations in the universe. It was surprising that he was there that day. Looking out the window, one could see a gigantic island floating in space, like a metropolis. Someone asked the MC what he was doing there, so Yugian looked down. A horned orc teller asked why he wasn't enjoying the party like the other newcomers, but the MC was more interested in his horns. Yugian replied that he wasn't interested, which irritated the other teller, who told him not to act like he was better than everyone else. The MC tried to say he didn't think he was better than anyone, but the orb interrupted and said he would surpass him soon. Then he left. He found the horned orb interesting, but then another group entered the hall, and several different figures appeared together. They were from another department of Celestial Body Incorporated and were there to meet the newcomers. They could continue enjoying the party. Hidden from them, the MC realized that they were actually there to assess the new recruits' performance in their first missions and attempt to recruit them. Their goal was clear: take the best among the newcomers and bring them into their departments. That place had turned into a battlefield of recruiters. Thinking how troublesome it would be to get caught in the middle of that mess, the MC planned to leave. Unfortunately, he was spotted by one of his seniors as the newcomer who had transformed the moment he reincarnated. Several recruiters gathered around him, trying to recruit him into their departments, and this made the MC very nervous. He said he appreciated all the attention, but was thinking about how he could escape from there. In his field of vision, a different person appeared, someone who didn't seem interested in him, and that gave him an idea. He moved away from the recruiters and started talking to that black and green figure, saying he should have warned him he'd be there. The man looked confused, but the MC continued his little act, hoping he'd understand and play along. The man quickly seemed to grasp what the MC was trying to do and joined in, which made Yuian very happy. He began leading the man out of the room, saying they could talk elsewhere, and the recruiters assumed he'd already been recruited. They didn't seem to recognize the man, but that didn't matter. Outside, the MC thanked him for helping him escape. The Dark Teller didn't show any reaction or say anything, which made the MC wonder if he really intended to stay silent. Something strange. Deciding not to wait for an answer, the MC turned his back and said he had to go. He must be busy with other things too. Before Yuvian could disappear, the man said that had been very amusing. The MC immediately stopped walking. The man said he had made sure no one could detect him, so how had the MC managed to see through his disguise? Nervous, the MC asked what he meant by that. Looking back, we saw that the man's aura was completely different and quite terrifying, with a giant green snake behind him. That was very bad. The protagonist realized that man was extremely dangerous. Without showing fear, the MC asked what he wanted, but the man said he was just curious. He didn't intend to harm the MC, not yet. He asks if Yuyan is going to answer his question. How was he able to see the man? The boy says he didn't actually see him. He only saw a book floating among all the tellers. By noticing a dark book flying in the air and focusing on it, the MC became able to see the man who owned the book. Yuyan explains that this was his ability, while a black smoke hovered very close to him, as if it might suffocate him right there. The man grows curious, and the MC explains that he has a good eye and can see things others cannot, and that applied to him as well. He was a bit unsure at first, but when he looked around and realized no one else had noticed the man, he says he couldn't deny it. Yuyan says it's the truth. He was different from the other tellers. The man laughs and says he had definitely noticed that. In any case, the MC apologizes for speaking to him so suddenly, and the man asks if that's really all. Clapping his hands and smiling in a creepy way, he says it was fate that they met and proposes a bet to the MC. He asks what kind of bet, and the man says it's simple. He just has to guess who he is, and if he's right, he'll be rewarded for it. The MC asks what happens if he gets it wrong. The man says he'll have to take responsibility for interrupting his entertainment. Grabbing the book from above the man's head, he accepts the bet, even knowing the man was confident he would guess wrong. The MC tries to open the book, but he doesn't have the strength to do so, which makes him very nervous. That meant the man was so powerful that not even he could read his book. He couldn't act beyond his level, but he remembers what the teller said at the start, that the divine spirits would also be there. Knowing the divine spirits were present, but not in the same room as the tellers, he assumes the man must be one of the 5 great divine forces: the Sky of Eden, Isensoidner of Asgard, Ogdode of Hermopolis, and the Olympian Pantheon. And beyond them, there was still Pandemonium, where the highest-ranked stories resided. Judging by his sinister energy, the strange design of the book, and the cover featuring a 3-headed serpent, there was no doubt. The MC then says he is the serpent that corrupts, the red dragon that burns, the one who was closest to the light and fell into darkness. The man standing before him was the first-generation divine spirit of Pandemonium, Satan. He then lets out a dry laugh. Excited, he says the MC guessed correctly who he was. He didn't expect the boy to figure it out, and begins clapping in applause. Yuyan asks if he's going to be spared now. Satan says that was partially a joke, to be honest, but the MC had surprised him. It would make more sense to punish himself than punish the MC. The boy doesn't believe that. He thinks that Monster would have punished him in some way if he had lost. He was a man of his word. Satan then says that in any case, he lost and must fulfill his promise. He thinks for a moment and gets an idea. He knew the MC would soon create his library, and the MC confirms that he would. Then he makes the following proposal. He will be the sponsor of his library, and asks what the MC thinks of that. Yuyan begins to weigh the possibility. Getting a sponsorship from such a powerful spirit was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Satan then extends his hand to shake the protagonists, who understands that this would never happen again. If he takes that hand, there would be no turning back, but he already seemed to have decided what he would do and extends his hand to shake his. He was still nervous. Would it really be okay to form this partnership? In the next instant, he makes his decision and, apologizing, says he'll have to decline the offer. The divine spirit doesn't seem pleased, but simply asks why he wants to reject his offer. Yudian says that his sponsorship would help the library, but it would also make him lose his freedom, and he was afraid of angering the Eden crowd. Satan then says he understands his concern, but asks if it still wouldn't be a benefit for him. The MC says that it's not enough for him, and that answer sparks Satan's curiosity. He says that the spirits of Pandemonium are incredible, especially him. He was one of the 7 executives, and that makes the MC want to work with them. But there was something else. The moment he made a partnership with him, the MC would only be able to tell stories from Pandemonium, and the authority over his library would belong to Satan. Yudian believed in the infinite possibilities of the stories he could showcase in his library. The path he should follow was a different one. That was the reason behind the protagonist wanting to refuse Satan's offer. He wanted to follow his own path. Yudian said he hoped he could understand, but Satan let out a scornful sigh, cutting off the MC mid-sentence. In the next moment, the divine spirit began laughing loudly, finding it amazing that he had ambitions greater than those of Pandemonium itself. The boy grew nervous, trying to say it wasn't like that at all, but Satan told him not to worry. He was praising him because he was right. The moment he accepted Satan's sponsorship, the MC's library would belong to Pandemonium, which would force him to give up on his own potential. Satan was impressed that he was refusing the easy path, which seemed foolish, but it was a kind of foolishness that caught his attention. He said he would end the conversation there. He wasn't ambitious enough to force anyone into anything. The MC asked if that meant he had given up. Satan replied that he wasn't sure. In fact, it seemed like it had made him even more greedy to force him to stay. The MC grew nervous at that answer. In the next instant, it was as if the boy were just a small toy in Satan's hands while he made his offer once again. Yugian replied that he wanted the donations from the divine spirits, but not through such a deal. Satan said he was arrogant, but he wouldn't punish him for that. As he left, he said it wouldn't be right to let the boy walk away empty-handed after winning the bet. Since he had come out victorious, he would be receiving a gift from him soon. He was really happy to have met the protagonist that day. Before disappearing completely, his last words were that he would be visiting the MC's library in the near future. Yudian was still shocked by everything that had just happened, and he looked at his system window, wondering how much time had passed. He still had to escape from the other tellers, so he left and found a library inside the company, something he said he never expected to find. It seemed like a quiet place. No one was looking for him, so he decided to kill some time reading a book. Someone approached and said it was strange to see a guest show up there. The MC turned to the side to see who was speaking. A very bright light began to shine, leaving the MC even more confused by everything. Looking closely, he noticed a golden book above a man, very bright and beautiful. It was also a very large book, and he wondered how valuable the stories written inside that book must be. The old man asked who he was. Most people didn't usually come in there. Yuyan replied that he was a new worker, and that impressed the old man. He laughed and said he had been rude. His appearance was so complete he hadn't imagined he was a newbie, and then recognized who the MC was. The boy asked what the old man was doing there, and he replied that he was the manager of that place. Yuyan asked if he worked there, but the old man said no one managed that place anymore, but he had volunteered for the task. Impressed, the MC wondered why someone with such an incredible book was retired. He definitely had an impressive past. The old man asked if it was alright for him to be there even in the middle of the initiation ceremony, and the MC said he had been harassed, so he ran away. He started laughing and said that the same had happened to him in his youth, and that must mean the MC didn't belong to any department yet. Yuyan confirmed and said he planned to keep it that way. The old man then asked if choosing such a difficult path wasn't scary. The boy replied that he'd be lying if he said he wasn't afraid, but he still had a goal, which piqued the old man's interest. He said the MC also had an yearning. The MC was confused, and the old man began to explain. Tellers aren't biologically born, but created with some level of abilities. However, they are blank slates when it comes to their desires. Most simply follow what the system and the company tell them to do. That was a fundamentally wrong path because it meant just following the herd. Unfortunately, most tellers lack that yearning. A teller who isn't swayed by others' words, like Yuyan, was extremely rare. The old man then decides to show something fun to the MC and asks him to follow. Yuyan is astonished by what he sees. They were in a corridor that stored all the stories that had truly influenced the mixed world. That was none other than the Hall of Fame of Celestial Body Incorporated. In all those stories lay the lives of all people. It was incredible to see. The protagonist was having the time of his life there. Unfortunately, the corridor didn't seem that long, because the next moment, the old man says they've already reached the end, and the MC is confused. The old man says that 30 years ago, life had been completely cut off. He had brought Yuyan there so he would remember that place, as it was tucked away in a closet. Such brilliant stories being forgotten. If he ever disappeared from this world, he'd be very sad to know that no one else would ever get to know that place, and that's why the MC was there with him. He had been the only teller who wanted to visit that place, even if it was old and worn down. The MC admired everything he could. The other tellers are only concerned with earning points and telling the same stories, those that belong to a different generation. Still, he believed the day would come when stories with that level of brilliance and captivation would be truly necessary for the world. Yuyan simply thinks that if Duyun had lived and completed that challenge, maybe he would be in that Hall of Fame too. He wanted to be someone like that. The MC calls the old man and thanks him for giving him such an incredible experience. The ceremony would end in 10 seconds. Before being teleported back to the world, he still asks the old man what his name is. The old man takes a moment to answer, but says if he comes to visit that place again, he'll tell him his name. Smiling, the boy nods as the teleport takes him back to Earth and says he'll see him again soon. The ceremony had ended. A voice shouts Hiram's name, bringing her back to the present. In that moment of war, she seemed very nervous. Yuyan asks if she can hear him, and she replies yes, so he tells her to stay focused. Hiram asks if that was really a war zone, and he confirms it. The siege that signaled the end of the medieval era and the beginning of the modern age and brought the Roman Empire to an end. That was the siege of Constantinople. The Roman Empire was destroyed by the Ottomans in that war, so now we understand what's happening. Hiram asks, just to confirm, if they're on the defending side of the war, that is, the Roman side. Yuyan says yes. He knew it was that place that awakened Hiram's abilities and turned her into the Empress of the Sword. This event was essential for her. Nervous, she asks if the protagonist has seen all that, and he realizes her voice is trembling. He says yes, and she asks if they're going to be able to win. The MC says not even 500 collectors could win that after all. It was an army of 7,000 against another of 150,000. He was also worried. Those 150,000 were only the attacking force. If you count the support troops, the numbers exceeded 300,000. Curious, Hiram then asks why so many collectors decided to participate, even with such low chances of victory. Yuyan explains that more than 2,000 divine spirits were watching that battle. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to show the spirits the potential of collectors they didn't yet know, and possibly make them fans. It was practically guaranteed that spirits from other libraries were also watching the event. That makes Hiram feel relieved and excited. Everyone was there to promote their libraries, so if they couldn't show their potential, they could lose their viewers. It was understandable to think that the two of them were just there to show off to the spirits, but the real goal was also to clear that domain. In his past life, the MC remembers that she hadn't been able to clear that domain either. He knew it was dangerous and says they'll just try. The MC's intention was to see if the current Hiram could clear that domain, as she was already stronger than the past Sword Empress. If there was even a small chance of clearing that place, then the attempt would be worth it. A couple approaches Hiram, asking if she was planning to act alone in that domain. The guy looks a lot like Archer version Shiru Emiya, and the girl resembles Nicole from ZZZ. They suggest teaming up with Hiram. Turning to the side without answering, the boy asks if she's just going to ignore them. Nicole from Temu says to just leave her alone, claiming she had become too arrogant after clearing a few domains on her own. Hiram's thoughts were clear. She knew they probably just wanted to take advantage of her, so it was better to act alone than to team up with those two. Someone shouts at the group of collectors, saying, "Welcome, mercenaries," and everyone turns toward the voice. An old man in golden armor was standing there, clearly in command of the defenses. The man introduces himself as Constantine, Emperor of Rome. He thanks everyone present for helping with the defense. While the man continues speaking, Hiram's thoughts begin to drift. Even knowing it was all an illusion, the only thing she could think about was how real he seemed. After finishing his speech, Constantine says the preparations are complete, and the siege of Constantinople would finally begin. The system announces that they only have one chance to complete this domain, and they must defend the castle and win the battle. The Ottomans yell that it's finally time to end the war. The two who had tried to form a team with Hiram take the lead, saying this would be too easy, and charge forward. With a magic strike from the boy, the ground in front of them explodes, launching several Ottoman soldiers away as he enjoys the chaos. Confident, he taunts the soldiers to attack him. None of the Ottomans seemed strong enough to deal with the pair, and that only made him more arrogant. Watching the scene, the MC becomes suspicious, feeling like something was off with this domain. The boy keeps casting extremely powerful spells, while the girl takes out multiple soldiers with just a few blows. After a few minutes of battle, sweat starts dripping from the boy's face, and when he looks ahead, something terrifies him. There were still an uncountable number of soldiers left, and the endless waves leave him in shock. The other collectors are already out of energy, and the divine spirits are losing interest in watching the battle. This throws the collectors into despair. Yuyan notices that they're tired because they used everything they had right at the start of the defense. On the other hand, he sees that Hiram is still fighting with ease. Defeating countless soldiers, she was still holding up well. Curious, the MC decides to check on the other libraries. When he enters the teller's room, he sees many of them in a panic. One of them even complains about how useless their collector is, especially because he ignored their advice not to burn all his resources at the start. The divine spirits begin to leave negative comments, pushing the tellers into even greater despair. Seeing that the Sword Empress was still doing great in battle, viewers from other libraries start migrating to the MC's library. Several spirits join his library, and the number of viewers reaches an impressive 512. One of the tellers sees the MC working on his story and gets annoyed, thinking he's acting arrogant just because he's been doing well lately. The teller starts yelling at their exhausted collector, telling him to get back to the fight quickly, as they were losing viewers, and the two begin to argue. Yuyan realizes that the tide of war is shifting and that everyone is getting really tired. Even Hiram was starting to slow down a bit. Soon she would be exhausted too, and that would become a big problem. He wonders what choice she will make when she's finally cornered in this fight. A massive explosion occurs behind the girl. Yuyan shouts to her that the castle walls have collapsed. She turns around shocked, wondering how that happened. They had used an Orban cannon, a powerful weapon commonly used by the Ottoman army. They were now advancing with full force. The collectors grow even more desperate, unsure of what to do and beginning to fear for their own lives. Constantine looks to the mercenaries, shouting for their help. Without them, victory would be out of reach. Hiram agrees. They needed to protect the Roman people inside the castle, and she turns to give instructions to the other collectors. Unfortunately, before she could say anything, most of them were already giving up and trying to flee before things got worse. The girl still tries to convince some of them to stay before they abandon the mission, but they had already made up their minds. They were going to run. One of them yells at Hiram, saying that the place hadn't been left unconquered for no reason. The strategy for this domain was to hold out as long as possible and then flee. Hiram refuses that idea and says they can't abandon those soldiers. Furious, the collector yells back at her, saying those people were just illusions. None of it was real. He didn't care about those people. They didn't even exist in the real world. But if she wanted to stay behind and die there, she could stay on her own. This surprises her, and she wonders if those collectors were really so cowardly as to give up that easily. Everyone there had become collectors with the intention of gaining recognition, so why weren't they doing that? Hiram stays behind, watching everyone else leave through the exit portal. The two armies were still clashing behind her, while she stood still, wondering what she should do. And that's how the chapter ends. The chapter begins with a recap of the start of this domain, with the introduction of Constantine and his request to the mercenaries. Not long after, all the collectors were already giving up because of the endless Ottoman army that kept advancing. Everyone flees, afraid of losing their lives, and Constantine tells himself he already knew they would do that and leave them to die. The great emperor looks upon the desolation of that battlefield, aware that he had lived through this infernal loop countless times. Despite that, he knows he can't stop fighting, so he charges toward the front lines with his army. This world was already decided. Even if he wasn't a real being, how could he watch his people be slaughtered and do nothing? If this fate was prophesied, then he would do everything in his power to fight and overcome it, no matter how many times he had to. One of the Ottoman soldiers sees the emperor and shouts for his companions to attack him and take his head to the Sultan. Constantine sees that his time had come. 2 soldiers were already closing in, ready to eliminate him once again in another loop. The next moment, something quickly whizzes past his face and causes a massive explosion right in front of him, startling him. He realizes it was Hiram who had caused all that damage. She was in front of him, but with her back turned. Looking at him with a somber expression, she remains silent. The soldiers remember that she was one of the mercenaries from earlier and ask if she was Joan of Arc. Constantine asks why she didn't flee like her companions. This war was already lost. Approaching the emperor, she says she still needed to fight, and she didn't want to see him die in vain. Constantine is shocked to hear that. All the mercenaries who had come this far had fled to save their lives. Hiram asks if he remembers all of them. The old man explains that he was created in that place. After all, his real self must have existed a long time ago, and he was just the remains of that. Hiram says that's not true. He wasn't just that. She thought of them as human beings too. That was why she had decided to help, and the reason she had stayed. Constantine, in disbelief, asks if she truly thought that, and she asks if he didn't want her to think of them that way. Moved, the old man feels his heart burning so strongly it leaves him speechless. This wasn't hatred or sadness. Smiling, the old man says he wants her to see them as humans, yes. What he was feeling was joy. He says he couldn't help but appreciate the fact that she saw them as real people with value and still wanted to help them. The next moment, the Ottoman army launches a new offensive, shouting that they found a breach to strike. Constantine asks her to hold those men off alone for a moment. Once they set up their defenses, the enemy will struggle. Hiram confirms, and the emperor of ancient Rome shouts for his comrades to defend their borders. That gave me chills. Charging forward with a smile on her face, Hiram is praised by Constantine as their